All right, so this is the second class in our series that will take a few classes, but we're looking at prophecy, and I'm doing a quick recap for you guys. So just to stress again, the idea here is to look at prophecy so we can counter our fear and strengthen our faith. And like we saw last time, it's not that we want to know and we can't know 100% of the detail in advance, so that we don't fall in the trap of trying to kind of set the date when Jesus will return, because no one knows of that date, he said himself. But I just want to stress again, point number 5 that I've added now is this is a very simplistic approach. So if anyone is a boffin in prophecy, they most probably will get a little bit frustrated with these classes, because we are not going to try and pinpoint and make a kind of interpretation that we feel so strong about and sure that we feel we've got it all 100% nailed down. And we just want to first get familiar with all the aspects, the players in all the stories, and the chapters and the symbolism, the different chapters involved, and the concepts. And then the more we deal with these aspects, at least the less we'll be fearful or a bit, put off by looking at prophecy. And we definitely want to keep it non-controversial, especially in the beginning stages when we are just looking at things at the most simplistic way to get familiar with this topic. All right, so the recap then, last time we spoke about this was we had a quick look at 2 views in the Brotherhood. I just want to make a disclaimer here again that we might not refer to these views too often as we continue, but we will now and then. And I will do my best not to do the straw man approach and try to give the true interpretation or perspective of views of those 2 views, and not make the one weak so we can maybe argue against it. So I'll always be mindful of that. We looked at some key chapters in the Bible that we know we'll have to visit eventually to sort them out and see where they fit into the whole framework. Then we looked at Daniel chapter 2, the image, for a History 101 lesson. We looked at the empires related, mentioned in that image, and how they relate to territories, and took a more geographical approach to prophecy, which you'll see tonight is similar. Then we had a very simplistic sequence of events before Christ's return. And we looked at a timeline that another brother put out there as to how he believed things will pan out, just to show you that when someone does some work, we can use it to help us in our studies as we go along, to test along with some timeline that is given or interpretation. And even though we might not agree with this or others, it still doesn't mean we do not respect those people. They put in hard work, so we will do. And we have respect for everybody that is trying to come to this aspect of the Bible, prophecy from the Bible, even though we might disagree in some ways. And then we ended off with an example of Armageddon, what that meant in the Bible. So I hope some of you can still remember this. So to start tonight, then we go back to that image in Daniel, and I want to show you then why when we go to the book of Revelation, you need to have a bit of a grasp of what's going on in Daniel, because Revelation is just an expansion and an extension of Daniel. So by now we should all know this. The image represents, the metals represent 4 great empires in the history of mankind, specifically the 4 that had a great impact on Israel and really punished the nation of Israel in God's big scheme of how he dealt with that nation. And when they expanded and conquered the world to get those empires established, then Israel was always in the picture and usually in trouble and getting punished because God wanted them to realign them and bring them back to his purpose. But we have at the bottom here the feet of clay and iron, and then the stone cut out without hands, the Bible says, which represents obviously symbolic of Jesus, that when he returns to earth will set up a worldwide government and replace all the other governments. We know all that in brief. Then what was important, we saw that from Daniel 2, when we go over to Daniel 7 and 8, these metals are now represented by beasts. And this is important because the image and symbolism in Revelation is all to do with beasts. So that's where, Daniel moves into, the book of Daniel moves into Revelation. And then whatever we read in Revelation, we go back to the Bible to have those things identified and interpret for us to get the right interpretation. So the Bible should always interpret itself and be relevant for everyone in every age, what they live in. And that's really what we want to strive to do. All right, so one of the foundations then that we laid, and we said we have to stick with that, otherwise, you'll get nowhere if you just move the goalposts, is that those metals are beasts. We just saw that easily in Daniel when those chapters are looked at. But the beasts are therefore these empires, kingdoms, like the metal gold, head of gold, was the Babylonian Empire, but it is represented by a beast later in Daniel that is a lion with wings. Therefore, those metals or these beasts that we are mostly going to focus on now and move away sort of from the metals, when we read of beasts in the Bible, we should think of empires, which are usually not a country and a kingdom as such, but a couple of countries, more than one country together forming that empire. So an empire can be made up of 2 or more kingdoms, and there will be rulers and kings in that empire of these countries. They are then also easily stated in the Bible that the horns that you see on the beast are kings, that we read in Revelation. But interesting to note that although these empires would conquer other countries, and those countries, the kings and rulers of those countries, although there are then many kingdoms in an empire, there was usually just one man, like in Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar. In the Grecian Empire, it was Alexander the Great. One man who was the ultimate authority, had the ultimate power over everybody else that might have ruled on his behalf in certain territories, right? Interesting and notable to just take note of that. What is interesting then, if you look at these empires and the territories that they occupied geographically, that is really what we're looking at when we're looking at these prophecies. It's talking about some governmental, political, authoritative power that is over a large part of the earth that grows. And you get that same feeling or idea when you read about the stone that hits Jesus coming, is a little stone, hits that image, and then that stone grows and to be a mountain that covers the earth. So we should actually add in there, you'll see from one of the verses, that empires, rulers, kingdoms are also referred to as mountains. So we want to therefore look at this from that geographical point of view. And religion plays a role in the sense that it's an ideology, and that could be, that could have an influence as to how the kings think and what is done in history, and how uh, we land up with the scenarios in the world as they come to be all down the ages. But that is not the focus of this prophecy. So I want you now to go to, or with me here on Daniel 2, verse 32, and we are going to read and just try and be good Bible readers that note as much as we can, because good Bible study, the first rule that was taught to me, which is very valuable, is good Bible study comes from good Bible reading. So it says there in verse 32, the image head was of fine gold, the breast of his arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron, and the feet part iron, part clay. And you saw till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon the feet, were iron and clay, and break them to pieces. So notice when Jesus comes, he's first going to defeat and beat something that is represented by the feet, 10 toes, iron and clay. But then in verse 35, it follows on that the iron and the clay and the brass and the silver and the gold were also broken to pieces together and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that there was no place found for them. The stone became a great mountain that filled the earth. So what does that imply? It implies that in smiting the 10 toes with clay and mingled with clay and iron, the other empires are also destroyed. But we know for today, those empires are no longer with us. So how can you destroy something that is not there? And it seems definitely to indicate later in scripture that the 10 toes that are mingled with the clay, whatever, remember now, whatever kind of empire that implies, because we saw the empires follow one from one to another. Somehow that last empire, or most probably some countries together ruling, and again one man ruling the whole earth with all those people helping him or in coalition with him, or something in that line, that makes this whole image stand again. Now we saw geographically that that is possible, because if we go and look at these nations implied, we find that it has to do with a part of the world that was included in all these empires. So that's why last time we zoomed in on this map where we went to the Middle East and we looked at these empires. I'm just highlighting the last one, the Roman Empire, the iron part of it. And those four empires in the Middle East there, you can see something must happen in the end to have sort of either the territories involved at play again, so that whoever's in control and has that authority that is taught to us in the Bible in the future will link up with the territories here in some way or form. And we just want to always link this idea. All right, so now I want to show you, and we'll come back to that map. I want to show you how Revelation is an expansion of Daniel. And I got these images from the internet, so I don't take credit for doing them. They do explain quite nicely for me, though. So you have in Daniel 2, the head of gold, which is said in Daniel 7 is Babylon, but it's represented with a beast, lion with wings. And we know that was Babylon. Then we have the chest of silver, and in Daniel 7, it is a bear with 3 ribs, and it's the Medo-Persians. Then the next one was the Greeks, and again, these beasts are very applicable to the some elements of that empire. For example, the Grecian Empire, a leopard is very applicable to that empire for the speed in which Alexander the Great conquered all those countries to set up his empire of that time. So, you know, here in Revelation 8:21, the shaggy goat, it's a goat in Daniel chapter 8 that fights the ram, just giving us more detail as to how those two kingdoms, the Medo-Persians, got subdued by the Grecian and taken over by the Grecian Empire. So you have a shaggy goat, he's the king of Greece. The large horn between his eyes is the first king. Notice horns are kings. The four horns that replace the one that was broken off represented four kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power. So, you know, we have one empire, but four kingdoms, one empire, but four kings. So just keep that in mind. Then we get to the legs of iron, which was a beast that had iron teeth. It was interesting enough, a beast that Daniel couldn't relate to any of the beasts that, you know, we see in nature. It was, you know, like just this vicious looking beast with iron teeth, and very well represented by the Roman Empire in the way that they were a harsh empire towards Israel and really stamped them out in the end. Okay, so notice Daniel 7:24. Of this beast, the one that lays iron, it says, as for the 10 horns out of this kingdom, 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them. So we got 11 kings. He will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. So, you know, we're definitely talking political and people who's in power, what kind of countries and territories they possess. And then notice when we look at the feet of iron and clay, this implies that we are looking for a 5th empire, so to speak, that will exist, that is not in existence today. It still has to exist, but it's got interesting enough different characteristics than the first 4, and it's also in harmony with these metals getting less and less valuable, and these kingdoms, you know, less coherent. Definitely the last one, this idea of iron and clay doesn't mix well. So you're going to have some kind of scenario where whoever these people are at play here, there's friction and not much you know, the kind of close people working together well in the political arena. Now, on this table that I've listed here, this person calls this last one Rome 2. So we have the Roman Empire, and then because it's iron, you can call it Rome 2. I don't mind, as long as you do not understand from that whatever you're going to pick in the Roman Empire, like say, for example, the Roman Catholic faith, that has to come out and now be so strong as something that's at play here. We are rather going to look for, okay, what in territories and geographically are we looking at here, and some other things that come to play as well. So we've got to be a bit cautious and just look a bit broader than sometimes picking one thing and saying because that was in the one, it has to be that for the next, whatever we want to call this Rome 2. We can maybe for homework, as you understand more or look at these things, you can decide on your own name for this last empire that has to exist before Jesus comes. Okay, so let's go to Daniel 7. And here I want to show you there's this transition or a jump from, you know, these kingdoms and then to the end time when Jesus sets up his kingdom. So how does this work? Let's read here. Daniel 7:23. Daniel says, The fourth beast, it was told him, shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth. Now we know that was that one of iron, right? It shall be dispersed from other kingdoms and shall devour the whole earth and shall tread it down and break in pieces. So the Roman Empire is seen in that way, especially the way they dealt with Israel. Then it says, sorry, and the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first and shall subdue 3 kings. So we have 10 kings plus another one, that's 11 kings. If we take 3 away, that 11th one subdues, we get to this number 8. 8 kings then are at play here. Now, this is important because later on in Revelation, we get to that number again and we know, okay, we're talking about the same king. But there are plenty of ways and detail given about this last beast and the 10 horns that come out of this beast to show that it is something that arises just before Jesus comes, and that's in verse 25. This one person or one king or horn, so in other words, a ruler of a country, is going to be part of 8 others that will, verse 25, I've highlighted for you, and you'll find these points in Revelation when it speaks again about this. So Revelation is going to just take a lot of Daniel and speak about it again, but we have some greater detail there. So what does this one person do, or this horn, this king? He'll speak great words against the Most High. That means he'll blaspheme against God. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High. He's going to make war against the saints. And he's going to change times and laws. So it kind of gives you that idea that he will, if he's against the saints and he's against God, he's going to change their laws and prohibit them from doing, worshiping the way they want. Then they shall be given into his hand. So, he's going to overcome these saints that he's persecuting and wearing out. And they are going to be given into his hand for a time at times and a dividing of time. Now, that term, we will look at that again later, but it means 1 plus 2 is 3.5 of 1 is 3.5 years. It's this term in the Old Testament that can also mean 3.5 years or 42 months. And you should already know that those terms ring a bell when it comes to prophecy and revelation. So we're going to hear those times again. But notice now, we have moved from verse 23, where we have the Roman Empire and the legs of iron, all the way to these 10 horns and 3 beasts appearing, another one, which is talking about someone who's persecuting the saints and blasphemes. And then we are right here in 26 now, when the judgment shall sit, they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it. This person is going to lose his kingdom, and the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heavens shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. So in prophecy, you will run into trouble if you want to take everything 100% chronological, and you don't allow for a vision that is given in the current time for Daniel. And even in his time, there was no Roman Empire on the horizon. So he couldn't even relate that beast to anything. It was too far away. And then we even talking about out of that time later on, which could be, like we know now, after the Roman Empire fell, we've had thousands of years or, a long period of time. And now we're waiting for this to happen when Jesus will come and destroy this person and take away their kingdom, and he will then set up his kingdom. So there's this jump, they talk about it as a gap sometimes. All right. So just keep that in mind. And now we see, I'm just going to repeat it, from the legs of iron to the end of Daniel 2, where the stone hits the feet and grows to a mountain, filling the whole earth. We move from the one right down to the other one. But the end is still not happened yet. Now, here's an interesting thing. I want you to notice that this beast, or this person, one king, represented by a horn, is, if you look at the yellow and the green and the blue, all these characteristics, they are mentioned like that almost verbatim in Revelation 13, verse 1 to 10, when John saw a beast coming out of the sea. So now we're going to go to Revelation, and you will see that they are repeating Daniel and putting us in a better context for the end of times that's still to come. Because from Daniel, there was quite a long time till John saw his vision, and still in John's vision, this end that Daniel so wanted to see, but God said, no, you can't. The vision is for a long time to come. Still, John didn't quite know how this was all going to turn out, but he gives us similar prophecy. So let's see what happens. So here we go with the first beats. Now, Revelation 13, verse 1, all to the end is fascinating, and I hope I can give you some inspiration to read Revelation, because if you read it once or twice, you'll sometimes get discouraged, but keep on reading it. And as you see more things, you can put them together. It becomes a fascinating book, and we should not be so hesitant or put such a big issue in our minds about reading this book, because first of all, if you've read Daniel, a lot of these things will be familiar, because what John now saw in Revelation 13 is a beast that rises up out of the sea. So we look at that just now. Every word's important. Having 7 heads and 10 horns. That comes right out of Daniel. On these horns, 10 crowns. Upon his heads, the name of blasphemy. So this beast, like we saw in Daniel, he blasphemes. But notice now that this beast has all the characteristics of the first 3 beasts. He was like a leopard. His feet was like that of a bear, and his mouth of a lion. So if we've been paying attention, we will know this is the beast that represented. The first one, lion, is the Babylonian. The bear is the Medes and Persians, and the leopards are the Grecian Empire. So this beast that comes up is that beast that Daniel spoke about, that one that's going to be there right at the end fighting the saints, and that Jesus is going to come and destroy. Let's see. The dragon is another symbol in the Bible, which is a very fierce beast, obviously. But if we go and have a look, especially at Revelation 12, which we won't do tonight, the dragon is a symbol of everything ungodly, everything that opposes God, political powers. For example, in Revelation 12, where the dragon is ready to devour the woman that was going to give birth to the child and devour the child, and the child was taken to heaven to save the child. Very symbolic of Herod, which, by the way, was born, he was of Arabian, Arab, Edomian descent, both his lines. So you have this beautiful symbolism of the old struggle between Jacob and Esau, Jews versus Arabs, right there. And God, the dragon, symbolizes at that time the powers that be that is contrary to God's plan. And God then takes Jesus out of harm's way. Okay, so, but here the dragon, now we have to go figure out what is the dragon that's going to give this beast at the end its power, right? In verse 13, verse 3, chapter 33, one of his heads were wounded to death. See, we're talking about there were 10 heads, then there was one, 3 was subdued, there's 8. Now we're talking about one head was wounded, but it was healed. So, we got to eventually figure out what's going on here. What is it, or has it happened? And now that's why this beast got so powerful, or is it still to happen in the future where something must seem to die and be destroyed, but then comes to life again? All the world wondered after the beast. Um, can we say that has ever happened? Where we can really say, okay, whatever time in history there was, what we could consider all the world wondered what this beast is, how come it came back to life. They worshiped the dragon, which gave power to the beast, and they worshiped the beast. Notice this beast is a very strong power military. Who is able to make war with him? There was given unto him a mouth. This comes straight out of Daniel, speaking great things and blasphemies. Power was given to him. There's that period, 42 months, a time and times and half a time. So we're talking the same thing in Revelation. It's an expansion, an extension, and an elaboration of what Daniel saw in Daniel chapter 7. He opened his mouth with blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and all that dwell there in heaven. And it was given him to make war with the saints, to overcome them. Power was given to him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. So if we want to make this lighter on ourselves, some people say, oh, it only applies to the saints as the people of Israel. But there's, to me, the evidence that this is a power that will be global is mentioned there, and we can see today how easily it can be for someone to control the whole world in a lot of different ways. So the big lesson is here, we need to understand this and at least come to a point where we will acknowledge that we could, if we're living in the last times, there might be times of tribulation and problems that will test our faith ahead. Notice the last few verses, verse 8, all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man hear, let him hear. He that leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with a sword must be killed with a sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. So I don't know how other people interpret this, but to me, these verses are saying, when that time comes, when this power overpowers the saints and kills some of them, then those people, the saints, should remember the person who is persecuting us, or the power at B that's persecuting us and killing us or persecuting us, will eventually be killed. That leads us to be taken prisoners, will eventually himself be captured and destroyed. So, we need to look beyond that and say, well, this is now that time. We have to really hold on to God and just know that he will bring us through anything, or even if we die for his name's sake, we will be raised and be there when this person or authority is destroyed. Because if you are killed in that time, you will be raised and fight with Jesus to destroy that beast. I've got a problem for you. If you can solve it for me, I will be happy. Notice in Revelation chapter 13, verse 2, this beast that comes out of the sea relates to the first 3 empires on that image. Okay. But if you go and research why it comes out of the sea, you get a lot of, not too much so far that I found, but some people will say that this is definitely because the Roman Empire, because I remember this beast came from that iron, the Roman Empire at the last bit, and then it jumps to the end times, as we saw. So people say, well, from Rome, obviously Italy is surrounded by the sea, so it came out of the sea. And yet, when we are talking here about the beast that came out of the Roman Empire, the beast that is likened with is the Grecian, the Medes, and the Babylonians. So that seems to be a contradiction to me. I'd like to show you that if you, let's look at it this way. Here's your Babylonian Empire, territorial-wise. You saw this before. Llewellyn, everything's still showing? I just want to double check. Okay, I think I got a yes there. All right. There's your Media and Persians. There's the empire for the Grecian Empire. And there's your empires for the Roman Empire. It is interesting that this area here in the middle here is where all those empires overlap. So we have to keep an open mind. You know, if, let's say, a ruler comes from Turkey and rules this territory here, it is quite possible then to say that that's that 10 toes and a clay kingdom. I'm not claiming that that is definitely the case, but it is a possibility that a lot of people will totally dismiss for their interpretation, but I just want you to keep that in mind. But here's the interesting thing. The beast that came from the earth, the second beast, which we're going to look at just now, if we look at these territories, then the first three kingdoms that is seen as the beast from the sea seems to be more the kingdoms that come from the earth, because all the territory around that is, like I've tried to show you here in brown, mostly earth. Whereas where the Roman Empire is much more, to me, a kingdom that arose out of the sea, because it's almost surrounded by sea everywhere. So to me, the Roman Empire, that is the beast from the sea, very fitly, geographically fits that description. But then the beasts that in Revelation are related to it is all the beasts for these kingdoms. Now, maybe the only way we can solve it if we say, well, there we are. We have to look, maybe it wants us to focus more and more right in the middle here. What's going to go on here? What's going to go on here? Just as some food for thought. All right, we are just going to do the second beast tonight, and then we will stop there. I hope you find this as fascinating as I always do. So verse 11, there was another beast that came out of the earth. This beast had two horns like a lamb and spoke as a dragon. Now, to me, that tells me that this beast was very deceptive. It's like a wolf in lamb's clothing. It's something like Jesus is the lamb that was led silently to the slaughter, willing to die for our sins. But this beast comes up and shows up like a lamb, but it's got its power from the dragon, and it can speak as the dragon. It exercises all the power of the first beast before him, causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. It does great wonders, so that it makes fire come from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. It deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which it had the power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which was wounded by the sword and did live. So notice, the second beast is much more deceptive and in the background, behind the scenes, so to speak. And it revives the first beast and lets the first beast take the prominence and be much more visible, and giving it, the power that it people will wonder, how can this beast be alive again? Verse 15, it had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and caused that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. This is now the first beast. He causes all, both and small, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand and in their foreheads. This is the first beast that does this, because it gets the power from the second beast. That no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is the wisdom. Let him understand to count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and number 666. So we're not going to go into too much detail there. Remember, we just want to get an idea. So all we want to take from this chapter tonight is that there is a power that can be related to the empires of Daniel's time. So in the future, a world power must arise that will meet the criteria of the first beast. And then we must also know that a second, much more subtle beast will appear that is going to put this first beast that seemed to die very much on the forefront again. And now, once we know that, we can do more detail and start seeing if we can find things in the world today that will really match up to this. So in the order here, I've got in the left, the beast of the sea is mentioned first in Revelation, and then the dragon is said to give its power to it. Then the second beast is mentioned, and we will see from Revelation 19 that there are 10 kings that give their power to this beast. So that's the order things are mentioned. But the order of conspicuousness as to where you can, how they come about and people see them, will be the dragon, the least conspicuous, right behind the scenes, giving power. The beast number 2 that we've just spoken about, also behind the scenes much more. The beast number 1 is the one that's very much more inconspicuous. And then definitely the 10 kings, when you read of them, that should be something that once that happens, we should be able to really see what is going on there. So the other thing to notice is both beasts will be in existence when Jesus returns. The second beast revives and is the force behind the scenes for the first beast. And we know this from Revelation 17, where the same beast is described, and it's the beast that the harlot rides on. So just when you think things are getting more clearer, now we'll find there's a harlot riding on this beast, and we have to figure out who the harlot is. There's a city, Babylon, that falls. We have to find out who that is. So I think this is my last slide. Revelation 17 might be the second last. So I hope I still got your attention. So let's just look at these two, and then we'll wrap it up. So in Revelation 17 verse 1, there came one of the 7 angels, and notice we just want to note the kind of players in this story, and then sort of a chronological framework as to who goes where, and then we can start sorting out the rest. Okay, so then John was told by one of the angels, "Come here, I'll show you the judgment of the great whore who sits upon many waters." So now we've got a harlot in the picture as well, who with the king of the earth committed fornication. Don't worry about identifying the harlot now. That's a study on its own. But what we want to know is verse 3, he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. You find this vision in the wilderness. There's some clue. I saw a woman sit on a scarlet-colored beast full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads, 10 horns. We're back with Daniel that we just saw in Revelation 13, the first beast, the one out of the sea, right? The one with the 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand. Upon her forehead, the name Mystery Babylon. I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered in great admiration. The angel said to me, "Why do you marvel? I'll tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and 10 horns." So what does he say about that beast? Look at the end of verse. The beast was in a bottomless pit, but behold, the beast was and is not and yet is. Similar language than we read now in in Daniel. And here is the mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains. Mountains are kingdoms. So there are 7 kingdoms that the woman is involved with. There are 7 kings, obviously, if there's 7 kingdoms, but 5 are fallen. This stuff used to confuse me. It still does, but I'll show you something interesting. 5 is fallen, 1 is, the other is not yet to come. And when it comes, you must continue a short space. So 7 minus 5 fallen is 2 plus 1, and another one to come gives you 4. We'll have to see what that means. We're not going to worry about it too much tonight. But notice the next verse. The beast that was and is not, even he is of the 8th, and he's of the 7 and goes into perdition. So where did we hear that? In Daniel, there was 10 plus 1 is 11, and 3 was subdued, so we get 8. So this king is the 8. We have a connection here. It's the same beast. And there's this one king in that confederation that is a real key player. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but received their power as kings 1 hour with the beast. This is a very important verse. It tells us that at the end time, when Jesus comes, the beast is going to get 10 kings to give they will form a kingdom, and they will give their power to the beast. Right. And these 10 kings will give their strength to the beast in verse 13, and then they will make war with the lamb. The lamb shall overcome them. So we have a kingdom, connection with the 10 toes. So when Jesus comes and he smashes the feet, he first of all, remember, like we showed, he destroys the toes with the 10 toes, iron and clay. That is the 10 kings. And we have to figure out where that will be territorial. What countries are those going to be? What authority is that going to be? But in doing so, he then that has the result of then the next step of the beast, the other kingdom, and the other 2 beasts also being destroyed. And as his kingdom grows in 1,000 years, all those dominions disappear, and Jesus rules the whole world. So at the bottom here, the 10 kings are the 10 countries that fights for the sea beast against Jesus. We know they lose. Now, here's the interesting sort of analogy to that you can find in history. The Roman Empire with the legs of iron, they had other nations that made up their armies to conquer the world. So you might have one person, the ruler of a country, like in the Roman Empire, not Alexander the Great, anyway, Julius Caesar. But when that empire that consisted of a lot of nations, they made up their armies of a lot of the nations. So when the Roman Empire came and destroyed Israel, the actual legion that came and destroyed the very temple was made up of people from Arab countries. It wasn't people from Italy, from Rome. So we can have the same scenario here. There could be 10 kings that make up Arab nations or other nations that come and physically fight Jesus, and he defeats them, but they were actually supporting a greater area of authority and countries, a superpower in the world that has world dominion. And by destroying them first, then Jesus goes after them and they also get destroyed. So that is really what we have to see here. Yes, there are these layers. In verse 15, he said to me, the waters which you saw were on the horses are peoples and multitudes and nations. The 10 horns which you saw upon the beast They will hate the whore and shall make her desolate and naked and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast until the words of God shall be filled. And the woman which you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So the note we need to make here is the 10 kings destroy the harlot, but they are defeated by Jesus and the saints. So this is one of those examples where Revelation 17 that we've just read, verses 16 to 18, where the harlot is punished by these 10 horns or 10 kings, happens before Jesus fights them. So by the time Jesus fights and the stone comes to smash the feet on the toes, the harlot, whoever that is, whatever that is, has been destroyed. So at least we can start, putting the chronology in order. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. And God willing, in the next talk, we will quickly run through Revelation chapter by chapter, just the headings to show you more of how the chronology works. And then we will start taking specific verses like Zechariah, for example, and say, okay, with all of this in mind, where will that fit in? And so on. So I'm going to stop there. I know it was a lot, but thanks for sticking with me. I hope some of it made sense.